call Andrew Lewin to move the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I beg to move that this House has considered the trading relationship with the European Union, and as per the order paper, I wish to declare an interest as the Chair of the UK Trade and Business Commission. Mr. Chair, I'm grateful to you and the Backbench Committee for granting me this debate, and for colleagues on all sides of the House who supported the application. It's never been so timely to talk trade, but before we look forward, I think it's necessary we look back at how we arrived here. It is 4,744 days since Prime Minister David Cameron promised the country a referendum on our future relationship with the European Union. In his words, a simple in and out choice. Ever since, the UK's relationship with the European Union has been anything but simple. In the decade that followed Cameron's speech, successive Conservative governments did everything in their power to distance the UK from our largest trading partner. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement was signed in 2020 with an ideological zeal to diverge as much as possible from the EU. Signed by the Conservatives and cheered on by Reform, it's a choice we are all paying for. According to the OBR, the barriers to trade that were put up by leaving the EU have put the UK economy on course to lose more than 100 billion over the medium term. The LSE has found that the increased barriers to trade have left the average person paying £250 more every year on their food shop. Repairing the UK's trading relationship with the EU is all the more important given the dramatic change in position of the United States. Our government, I believe, deserves praise for its calm and measured response to tariffs, but I don't think any of us can presume to know what the position of the White House will be 6 days from now, let alone 6 months from now. By contrast, what is certain is that the EU will remain the UK's largest trading partner. The EU accounts for 42% of UK exports and 52% of imports. It is our most essential trading partnership. I welcome all this Labour government has done in our first 9 months to begin to repair and reset that relationship. The Chancellor was the first to attend a Eurogroup meeting since Brexit. The Prime Minister has been in lockstep with fellow European leaders in our shared support of Ukraine, and through their leadership, the opportunity for a substantive change in UK-EU relations has been established. But it's vital, Mr. Chair, that we seize this opportunity. I want to see the most ambitious trading deal possible and will focus my remarks today on 3 points. 1, the importance of a deal covering mutual recognition of conformity assessments. 2, the case for deep alignment between the UK and the EU on goods and services. And 3, a bespoke visa-based youth mobility deal. One of the failings of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement was the lack of a mutual recognition agreement on conformity assessments. Conformity assessments are used to determine whether a product meets a country's regulations for goods, ensuring safety, performance and compliance with legislative requirements. Conformity markings include the UK's UKCA mark and the EU's CE mark. With an agreement, countries that recognise each other's conformity assessment bodies and procedures avoid duplication of testing and certification for goods. Without a mutual recognition agreement, products made in the UK and intended for the EU cannot be tested here and vice versa. The EU has MRAs of conformity assessments in place with countries including Switzerland, Australia, New Zealand, Japan and Canada. The UK with the USA, Switzerland, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. Last month, a coalition of 19 business groups, including the CBI, Make UK and Tech UK, called for a UK-EU mutual recognition agreement. They said it would support export-led growth, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises. I look forward to hearing from the Minister on the practical steps he is taking to help make this a reality. My second point is focused on alignment with the EU on goods and services. When the Conservatives signed the TCA, the winners were the ideologues who have been advocating for the UK to become a version of Singapore-on-Thames. The losers were our businesses, especially those exporting goods. The last government made an active choice to diverge from European Union regulation and standards. And if you listen to business, it doesn't take long to see the impact. The British Chambers of Commerce surveyed their members on how they've been impacted by the TCA. They listed challenges for business surrounding red tape, bureaucracy, paperwork and delays in goods flowing through customs. Recently, the Chartered Institute of Export and International Trade found that all this has caused a staggering 2 billion extra pieces of paperwork for businesses since we left the EU. Part of the answer must now come from closer alignment on goods and services once again. Earlier this year, Best for Britain commissioned Frontier Economics to model a scenario where there was, and I quote, an expansive approach to mutual recognition in which the UK and the EU take active steps to minimise regulatory divergence and commit to recognising the equivalence of each other's regulations. I happily will.
I thank you for giving way. Would he agree with me that in my recent business roundtable in Monmouthshire, I spoke to a business called Trywall who exports to the EU, and now instead of sending one lorry load of their goods all across the EU to different countries, they have to send a different lorry to every country, and this really increases their cost. Would he agree with me that we need closer alignment to avoid this kind of problem?
Grateful to the honourable member for her intervention. I agree entirely, and I've heard far too many stories exactly like the one she describes in communities all across the country. So I will.
I'm grateful to giving way because he's making a very good point here. I've given up days of my life helping fish exporters from Shetland, trying to free up some of that red tape. But the truth of the matter is that in substance, although we've put friction into those exports, the standards are still broadly the same, and it wouldn't be that difficult at this point in history to get the necessary alignment, especially through an SPS agreement, for example, because we're looking at a market which is important to us where we have similar standards, unlike looking across the Atlantic where for food products we have very different standards.
Thank you. Grateful to the honourable member for his intervention and defer to his expertise on the fishing sector. But he's absolutely right about the need for an SPS deal. I'm proud that was something that was in the Labour manifesto that I was elected on and something that we're actively seeking to pursue. Just coming back to this work that was commissioned by Best for Britain, because I think it's important. They said if we do get that deep alignment, the modelled impact was a boost in UK GDP of 1 to 1.5%. If in parallel you were to pursue deep alignment in the services sector, the combined benefit could be over 2% of UK GDP. And to give that some context, every 1% of UK GDP is worth around 26 billion. So the prize here is potentially a 50 billion boost to the economy. Finally, youth mobility. Members may have seen that more than 70 Labour parliamentarians put their name to a letter yesterday which called for a new and bespoke youth visa scheme for UK and EU citizens aged under 30. Now, as with all of the UK's existing schemes, we believe that this should be time-limited and subject to a cap on numbers. But a bespoke scheme would extend new cultural, educational and economic opportunities to young people in the UK and the European Union. I was glad...
I thank my friend for giving way. He's making a fantastic speech, and I declare an interest as a UK citizen under 30. But I wonder if he agrees with me that with the EU-UK summit coming up on the 19th of May, this provides an ideal opportunity for the government to look at issues like a youth mobility scheme, which will surely provide better opportunities for young people in the United Kingdom to explore, learn and find opportunity across borders too.
I agree entirely with my honourable friend and remain jealous of his wisdom and youth at the same time. But look, for a clear majority of people in this country, extending opportunities for young people matters, and I believe it's a move that will unlock further opportunities for trade, cooperation and strengthen our bonds with the European Union in the future. But it's also vital, Mr Chair, to underline why this is materially different to freedom of movement. Under a visa scheme, people have to apply in advance, numbers can be and will be monitored, and it means that any deal will follow a similar shape to ones that this country already has in place with countries like Australia, Canada and even Uruguay. Mr Chair, after so much damage done by the Conservatives, the government deserves huge credit for all it has done to seek to repair relations with the European Union. This is our largest and most important trading relationship, and so much is at stake. I hope we can be as ambitious as possible for the reset, and I look forward to hearing from colleagues and from the Minister.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for moving the motion. It won't have escaped anyone's notice this is a popular debate. So can I remind everyone, continue to stand if you want to continue to be called. and we are going to run this debate until 4:55 this afternoon. Can't go any later. And then what that means is that everyone, if they get equal amounts, will be out 2.5 minutes each. So if I can ask you to exercise some discipline, we'll get in as many as we can. The question is that this House has considered the trading relationship with the EU. Stephen Geffens.
Jeremy, it's a pleasure to be under your chairmanship today, and it's good to see how popular this debate has been with colleagues. And I'll also congratulate the member for Welwyn-Hatfield today in securing this debate. Mr Chair, leaving the EU has been devastating for our economy. A hard Tory Brexit that unfortunately this government has embraced continues to be devastating for the economy. The economic impact, particularly for SMEs, is something they continue to live with day to day. The impact on our food and drink industry, care and the NHS by withdrawal of freedom of movement is something they continue to live with from day to day. Something Scottish Labour, in fairness, I know that the Minister is a member, have embraced by talking about decentralising and a potential migration system for Scotland, and I hope that he'll be able to support my bill on that tomorrow. We've also seen the security impact, with every other country in Europe and Western Europe considering the EU and NATO as being twin pillars of their security in the aftermath of Russia's aggression. But more than that, and I'll talk to what the member for Welwyn-Hatfield talks about there, has been the impact on all of our rights, but particularly those of young people, that this political generation leaves fewer rights than we ourselves have enjoyed. And my sympathies to the member who is under 30, because he enjoys fewer rights than I enjoyed and the member for Welwyn-Hatfield enjoyed. And the member for Welwyn-Hatfield talks about a cap. Is that a cap on whom? On which young people do not get the opportunities that he himself had, that the Minister had as well? And that's something we should all feel deeply ashamed of and deeply uncomfortable with. It doesn't have to be like this. As The Economist said, you could rejoin the customs union, giving the Exchequer an immediate boost very, very rapidly. You could rejoin the single market, and even pursuing the trade deal that was promised by the Conservatives, and there are precious few of them today to defend their deal, would see 0.4% after a 4% hit to the economy. Now, Mr Chair, today Labour MP after Labour MP is going to stand up here and tell us about how awful the Brexit deal is. We've been through it before. Are they actually going to do anything about it, or is their government going to do anything about it? This is the biggest crisis, the biggest disaster to have hit the UK economically, socially and rights-wise. But instead of doing anything, they've stuck the architect of this deal, Lord Gove, into the House of Lords. Can we please see some action?
Liam Byrne.
Mr Chairman, thank you very much. Let me start by congratulating my honourable friends for securing this debate, and indeed for the impact it has made in this House, and for a superb speech to launch this debate today. We are all now history's witnesses to what is a radical reshaping of the Western alliance. Yesterday, the United States Commerce Secretary said that America first does not mean America alone, but if we look beyond the rhetoric, if we look at the reality, it is very clear that what Churchill called the sinews of peace are now under tremendous strain. America is now exiting the multilateral alliances that it created under Presidents Roosevelt and Truman and Eisenhower between 1944 and 1960. And what some have called a Mexit must now force us to rethink Brexit. We have got to look again at resetting our alliance with our closest neighbour. And so what I wanted to do in the minutes allowed to me today is just to draw the House's attention to the draft Green Paper that we think the government should have published by the Business and Trade Committee on the 4th of April, which sets out 20 different ways in which we think that we can reset our relationship with our closest neighbour. Those areas span defence, they span regulation, they span energy cooperation, they span services and innovation. 20 different measures across that space could actually give us as big an economic boost as is needed to offset the cut from tariffs. So everything from an EU-UK defence pact, shared industrial policy, joint plan to defend critical national infrastructure, deeper cooperation to defend ourselves against economic threats, an ambitious SPS agreement, mutual recognition of customs schemes, mutual recognition of conformity, assessments, streamlining customs declarations at the border, enhancing cooperations at our ports, rejoining the PEM Convention, making sure that we've got long-term regulatory roadmaps to maximise the alignment between sectors in our economy and sectors in the EU, we found that there is wide-scale support for that across the business community in the UK and indeed in the European Union too. The fourth big area was then in energy. One of the biggest opportunities for deeper cooperation between the UK and EU. We need to be avoiding the cliff edge that may come when CBAM is introduced in this country and in Europe. We should be joining together to create a single CBAM. We should be linking our emissions trading schemes. We should be reconnecting our electricity markets, because that ultimately is going to help drive down electricity costs here in this country. And then fifth, Sir Jeremy, on services and innovation, clear we have to secure a new data adequacy agreement. We have to advance cooperation in financial services and research, restoring mutual recognition of qualifications with a new roadmap that might actually make some progress. We've got to strike a fair deal for our touring artists, and I absolutely agree with my honourable friend about the need for a visa-based, time-limited, number-capped scheme for youth mobility. That too is in our mutual interest. What surprised us most, Sir Jeremy, is that it wasn't difficult to find 20 different measures across those 5 areas of cooperation where we can deepen our relationship for the future. That reset is now imperative if we are to reset the UK's power in the world and, crucially, deliver prosperity for the people we came here to serve.
Carla Denyer.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and thank you to the member for Welwyn Hatfield for securing this important debate ahead of the UK-EU summit next month. This summit comes in the throes of alarming uncertainty created by President Trump's dangerous, chaotic and authoritarian approach to trade and international relations. And that Trump turmoil makes building close relationships with our EU neighbours even more urgent. And we do need to fix those relationships, because the UK's withdrawal from the EU has caused profound damage to our relationships with our nearest and biggest trading partner. I won't repeat the stats that members have already highlighted, but I do want to highlight that it is the smaller firms that are seeing the biggest fall in trade. And I know that Brexit has caused major problems for independent local businesses in my constituency of Bristol Central. We need a bold and positive plan. I will.
I thank my honourable member for giving way. She's making an extremely powerful speech on the point of SMEs, which he recognised that the defence industry, specifically in Bristol, is suffering from the inability to receive adequate funding from across Europe, and a defence, security and industrial bank that is underwritten by the UK alongside its European partners would be able to unlock the investment that Bristolian businesses so vitally need.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, the honourable gentleman, ideally he shouldn't sit there. There's no microphone. We're not picking him up. So, but I'm sure the honourable lady heard him and can respond.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. I did hear the point. The point the member made was about defence industry businesses that are actually largely outside my constituency. So I'm not familiar with the details of the situation those are in, but it's an interesting point to make indeed. We need a bold and positive plan to get closer to the EU, not capitulation on vital trading standards and regulations to an untrustworthy US president. So far, the government's reset of the UK-EU relationship has some good points in it, some useful moves around reducing border checks on agri-foods, mutual recognition of qualifications, and addressing problems facing touring artists. But we must go further. In particular, there is a huge mutual benefit to be gained from greater climate and energy cooperation in terms of improved energy security and the delivery of net zero at a lower cost. So I do hope that the Minister can assure us that this will indeed be a central part of the UK-EU reset and upcoming summit. It's also the case that the UK has been falling sharply behind EU chemical safety laws post-Brexit, which is a point of particular concern. So as well as supporting closer trade ties with the EU, alignment with EU chemical safety protections would be beneficial for the UK in terms of minimising costs to industry as well as maintaining high environmental, worker and public health and safety standards. Ministers will be aware that the Trade Union Congress, representing millions of workers across the UK has also recently said that a closer trading relationship with the EU is, quote, more important than ever in an increasingly fraught and volatile world. I agree. The Green Party is clear that the UK would be better off inside the EU, and we, like many, were frankly astonished to see Keir Starmer, just days before the general election, say that the UK would not rejoin the EU, not only in his premiership, but in his entire lifetime. I think that was a remarkable thing to say. Recognising that the UK is not going to be rejoining the EU imminently, I and the Greens still feel that it would be wise for the UK to rebuild trust, rebuild those links, break down those barriers with a view to rejoining the EU when the domestic and international situation makes that more viable. And in the meantime, joining the customs union as a first step towards full EU membership would be a vital step and a way of resolving many of the worst problems resulting from Brexit, not least the harm done to our trading relationship with the EU. Thank you,
Thank you very much. Can I assure all honourable members the clock is not correct? The honourable lady was not talking for 7 minutes. So, Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. This is an important and a timely debate, and I thank my honourable friend, the member for Welwyn Hatfield, got that right, for calling this debate. Some will query why we need to have this debate in the first place. They shouldn't. It's nearly a decade since the European Union referendum vote, and nothing looks the same after a decade. I can give you every assurance of that. And it's particularly the case for our country, indeed the world. And I think the British people know this. The political system has changed. It's changed beyond all recognition. For me, my politics have always been personal, and that's especially true for this subject because the question of whether to remain or leave split my family, just as it will have split so many other people's families, particularly in my constituency. With my father, I would speak with him every night, and we would put the world to rights. We would talk about his issues and how politics often was failing to meet them. He's no longer with us, so I can't have those conversations anymore. And I have to say I would have loved to have known what he would have thought about this particular debate, because he did back Brexit. As an immigrant son of the 1950s, he saw the wreckage of war. He appreciated an economic union that sustained peace. As a disabled man of the 2010s, who lived the pain of poverty, he rejected a political settlement that scarcely listened. He voted for Brexit not as an ideologue, but as a pragmatist. He asked the question, what will make my hard life better? And for him, Brexit was the answer. And so now when I call for closer UK-EU relations, I do so as my father's son, not as an ideologue, but as a pragmatist, because when we ask that same question, what will make life better, the answer is not this painful, exhausting Brexit deal. Instead, it is closer economic ties with our nearest neighbour and our biggest trading partner. And to be clear, I do not criticise anyone who voted to leave, because I cannot criticise my father. I respect the choice, I respect the reasons, but as the MP for Bournemouth East, I cannot serve my constituents without doing all I can to make their life better. And we have to be frank. Brexit has led to our GDP growing by between 4 to 8% less from 2016 to 2024. We've seen significant loss of job opportunities, and smaller firms are suffering the most. But we know too that closer ties with the European Union and EU countries can improve our prosperity at a time where we need to be doing that more than ever. We of course should assert our rights as an independent trading nation, not cower in the corner, unhappy about having that independence. But with that independence, we have to do what is right by our national interest. With Trump tariffs and with a Chinese regime that's hard to trust, I believe that means a pragmatic approach to Europe. And we should have a balanced, time-limited and capped youth mobility scheme to work, study and travel, regulatory alignment to make aspects of trade easier, aerospace collaboration. We must enable UK firms and citizens to travel and work for longer in Europe, deepen security cooperation and cut red tape. In conclusion, this government will not meet any of its goals, whether it's growing the opportunity achieving secure, clean energy, opportunities for all, and safer streets without closer ties economically with Europe. We are here to do the right thing for our constituents, to exercise our sovereignty, our democracy and our independence as our country. We believe that growth is the route to prosperity and trade is the route to growth, that we have no other option but to have closer ties with Europe.
Jim Shannon.
On your chairship, and can I thank the honourable gentleman for Welwyn Hatfield for setting the scene so very well. I supported Brexit, I voted for it, and unfortunately we didn't get the Brexit. We voted for it, the rest of the United Kingdom got, but that's the situation where we are. In Northern Ireland, we're stuck in the middle with no tangible benefit. We don't know whether any of my local firm with a large number of employees that ship their produce to the US are going to be hit with untenable tariffs as some of their products are sourced in neighbouring Republic of Ireland. Whether they can avail of much friendlier UK tariff in totality, or whether the EU retaliatory tariffs will be the death knell of their business. And the sad thing is, that's not just one business, that's a huge number throughout my constituency. As we all know, all businesses have an element of uncertainty, but the strain on exporters within my constituency of Strangford is considerable, and any discussion on the trading relationship with the EU must also note the difficult position that Northern Ireland is in until the EU ceases their death grip on the UK, and currently this grip feels like a noose on the neck of Northern Ireland. The DRS, the Duty and Reimbursement Scheme, has been said will be used to mitigate any effect in Northern Ireland, and yet the reality of this, Sir Jeremy, is this scheme is that it's time-consuming and the delay in cash flow may not be sustainable for many traders. It is my firm opinion that any trade deal with the EU can only come with the end to the death grip of the Northern Ireland Protocol, an end to the red lane and access to state aid, and the return to the UK-wide economy instead of the half-in, half-out with duty paid and no representation given. We have businesses in Northern Ireland, Sir Jeremy, who say they can't continue, and I know they can't continue my discussions with them in my constituency and further afield, to trade without sensible governance. And today I asked the Minister if he wouldn't mind. I always try to be respectful, you know that, it's the way I do things. The Minister will have his opinion, but he will have to go back to Cabinet and ask the questions that need to be asked. Where is Northern Ireland situated in any enhanced trading with the EU? Are we set to the side as an aggravating inconvenience? Or are our government, and I believe they must bring us back to have a seat at the UK table once again? Yes, enhanced trade with the EU could be beneficial when there is something that doesn't go against what the Brexit decision was. But the strangling of Northern Ireland must end, and this House has a choice to make once again. I do hope at this time the entirety of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is a choice that is made for the benefit of us all. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Mike Reader.
Your chairmanship, and this debate comes at such a critical time as people talk about the UK-EU summit coming up, but actually we're at a lynch point here of the trade triangle this summer, with the trade strategy, the small business strategy and the industrial strategy coming forward to give British businesses certainty. And in the limited time I've got, I wanted to focus on two specific areas. One that impacts my constituency, which is the impact on the logistics sector, and one from my personal experience in the construction industry. So logistics for Northampton South, 1 in 5 people in my constituency work in the logistics sector. It is an absolutely critical linchpin to my local economy, and I do spend quite a lot of time going to warehouses and distribution centres to hear from small businesses and large about the challenges they're facing. And probably the number one issue that comes up is friction with the EU. It's red tape, it's uncertainty over licensing agreements, it's all of the issues that have been created by the botched deal that the Conservatives put forward, and they cannot see a way that we can fix it in the short term without a real hard reset of our trading relationship with the EU. Of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. 20,000 people employed by the logistics sector in North West Leicestershire. In part because we have the second largest freight airport in the UK with East Midlands Airport, key to international trade. Does my honourable friend agree with me that constituents like ours, that logistics need effective trading relationships with the EU? They're not only key to our local economies, but key to long-term growth.
Fantastic point. And actually, one of the big things that businesses make clear to me is that we have to approach this with a bit of humility, because we have to recognise the impact that Brexit has had on European businesses and the cost of them trading with the UK as well. This isn't a one-way issue, it's impacting on both ways, and that's a real problem that firms are facing. And, you know, BTOM, a real issue if you're importing particularly agriculture and plants. I've got a large food manufacturer in my constituency who, number one issue they raise for me is getting stuff in and out of the EU, a real challenge. But From a personal experience, I worked in the construction sector all my life, and I was very fortunate to work on a number of projects across the EU, the Ellinikon regeneration in Greece, major airports in Poland, the Dublin Metro in Ireland. And one of the real challenges we had is mutual recognition of professional services. Now, professional services is one of the 8 verticals in the industrial strategy. It's a real benefit to the UK to be able to export our professional services globally. But the lack of mutual recognition agreements between UK and EU is really hampering our ability to take the great British expertise and skills we have into Europe. And, you know, architecture is a great example. The Conservatives tried to get an agreement through the TCA of matching up architecture, but it still wasn't achievable. So we have UK architects unable to work fairly and on an equal playing field with EU architects in the EU. It's an absolutely crazy situation we're in. So as we go towards the UK summit, I hope the government is really considering how those negotiations can help bolster the strategy that the industrial strategy is going to set forward. Those 8 core vertical sectors, manufacturing, clean energy, professional services, need a really robust and clear trading agreement with the EU. And, you know, I'm very grateful for the Honourable Member for bringing today's debate, and it's very clear around the room there's a lot of consensus to a very, very hard reset on that relationship to make it easier for all our businesses.
Ryan Matthew.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I also thank the member for Welwyn and Hatfield, for bringing this Welwyn and Hatfield. We're getting there. We're getting there. Recent times have shown how important reliable friends are. To our west, the United States under Trump has shown how a reckless willingness to sacrifice prosperity across the globe and utilise bullying tactics to secure a trade deal that may well damage British interests. This could see a weakening of high British food standards, which would be to the detriment of our health, our farmers, our farm animals, and most importantly, our taste buds and morals. Yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. The last Conservative government's botched deal with Europe has strangled trade and investment in British farming. Rural communities and farmers in Glastonbury and Somerton have been badly let down. So does my honourable friend agree with me that we should put the UK into a position of strength by forming a new and bespoke customs union with the EU that will unleash the potential of British farming in the UK?
I thank the honourable member for her intervention, and I am heartily in agreement with her. Now, I've visited many farms across Melksham and Devizes, and it's clear that British farmers work incredibly hard to ensure our food is high quality and produced to a high welfare standard. We do not want British farmers or British consumers to be confronted with US chlorinated chicken or US hormone-treated beef in our supermarkets. Instead, we should look to trade with our partners who respect our standards, can provide a stable foundation on which to grow the UK economy. The European Union provides this, from logistics to standards. Trade with the European Union makes sense, and that's why we must look to improve our relations with the world's largest trading bloc. And I echo the calls of my colleagues for the government to urgently work towards a new customs union by 2030. From cheese to cask ale, there are a number of companies producing great British products in Melksham and Devizes. A positive export market with our closest neighbours is vital to allow companies like these the opportunity to grow and expand into an international market. Today I spoke with Darren Larvin, Managing Director of local cheese manufacturer Coombe Castle International. He told me that his company exports right across Europe to the Netherlands, Lithuania, Spain, France and Germany. His company has won 4 Queen's Awards and 1 King's Award for export. The experience of Brexit has not put his company off exporting to Europe, but it has made it harder and cut margins. Prior to 2016, Darren told me it was as easy for him to send his company's produce to Germany as it was to Manchester. It's surely time for us as a country to wake up and smell the very good European coffee and rebuild our relationship with the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd also like to thank my honourable Member for Welling Hatfield, for securing the debate today. He has spoken with passion and insight, and I know his constituents, and indeed many across the country, care deeply about our future relationship with the European Union. In South Norfolk, this relationship isn't abstract. It's tangible. It's in the labs of the Quadram Institute, the Sainsbury's Laboratory, the Earlham Institute, and the John Innes Centre, world-leading institutions that make up Norwich Research Park, whose discoveries in genomics, health and crop science are shaping the future. But innovation doesn't happen in isolation. A more pragmatic relationship with the EU would allow these centres to collaborate more freely, access essential data and funding streams, and unlock discoveries that could change our lives for the better. At Hethel, Lotus Cars is preparing for the next generation of electric vehicles. As European consumers lose faith in Tesla, an opportunity is opening up. And with fewer trade barriers, Lotus can step into that gap and become a leader in the EV market across the continent. Our farmers, too, are watching closely. South Norfolk grows and rears some of the best British produce. A market worth $2 trillion lies just over the channel. And we should be exporting more of our food, not less. A sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, sensible, simple alignment, would remove unnecessary barriers and allow our horticulture sectors to also flourish. Jobs, investment, international strength, and most importantly, economic growth, right here in Norfolk and across the UK. That's what closer, pragmatic relationship with the EU can deliver. And let me say this, people in Norfolk are not led by ideology. We're a practical bunch. If something works, great. If it doesn't, let's fix it. Today's debate isn't about going off on ideological bents. It's about putting Britain first, about taking control of our future once more, and refusing to let the greatest nation on this planet be relegated to the status of a secondary power on the world stage.
When he's kept below 2.5 minutes, not everybody has, so I'm afraid that means that we are sub 2.5 minutes each if we're going to get everybody in. I'm loath to impose a formal time limit, so I would ask colleagues please to be as disciplined as they can. Clive Jones.
And it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Sir Jeremy. And I commend the honourable member for Welling and Hatfield for his evidence-based opening remarks. The Conservatives' botched Conservative deal has been a disaster for Britain's trade and for our economic growth. The majority now believe that this was a massive mistake by the Conservatives. Trade deals should be designed to streamline processes and reduce barriers. The previous government somehow managed to negotiate agreements that only added mountains of red tape for businesses. Since Brexit, 2 billion pieces of paperwork have been added to UK exporters, enough paper to come from 250,000 trees, all go around the world nearly 15 times. This mountain of unnecessary bureaucracy holds back businesses from new markets, from hiring more workers here in the UK, and from contributing to our economy through taxes. The Office of Budget Responsibility has warned that our economy will be 4% smaller in the long run, and since 2019, UK goods exports have grown by a mere 0.3% a year, far below the OECD average of 4.2%. And let's not forget the 20,000 small businesses that have simply stopped exporting to the EU because of conservative red tape that is suffocating that part of their business. We need to have closer alignment with the European Union. We need to work with our closest partners to boost our economy and create meaningful change. It means that there are more public funds to pay for the services that nobody thinks are working anymore. New hospitals, new GPs, more GPs, appointments, fixing roads and building schools. Trump's tariffs will hit our businesses in so many areas, particularly the automotive business. Can the Minister give an update on the trade deal negotiations with the US and confirm his government, unlike the Conservatives, will only act in the national interest and that we won't be bullied by Trump and Vance?
Thank you very much. Phil Brickell.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. Before I begin, may I declare my interest as the Secretary of the APPG on Germany. It is our country's relationship with Germany, seen through the prism of the UK-EU relationship, I will refer to today. And may I thank my friend, the Honourable Member for Welling Hatfield, for securing this important debate. Indeed, it is a timely one. I hope colleagues will join me in celebrating last week's anniversary of Bolton being twinned with Paderborn in Germany for 50 years. That twinning is a symbol of the deep civic relationship between my constituency and our European neighbours. It's a partnership which transcends political developments, but which is testament to our inescapable geography as a nation in Europe and as a large trading partner with the continent. Indeed, it's my view that our best course of action must be to protect ourselves from the erratic and unpredictable global headwinds of Donald Trump's America and Xi Jinping's China. That must mean strengthening our trading relationship with our nearest and largest economic partner, the European Union, and the 27 countries which make up that bloc of 450 million people. Analysis from Frontier Economics has suggested that deeper alignment between the UK and the EU on goods and services could offset the impact of tariffs on the UK and even help our economy to grow by 1.5%. In 2023, the EU still accounted for 42% of the UK's total exports and 52% of our imports. Let me repeat that. Over half of our imports, 7 years after the referendum result. So Europe remains the bedrock of British trade. And yet, can we really say that we're currently taking full advantage of having such a huge market for British goods on our doorstep? Many British regions can have productive relationships with European partners. Look at Siemens, a major German engineering firm which has invested heavily in Greater Manchester's advanced manufacturing sector. So instead of residing from the challenge ahead and relitigating debates from a decade ago, we should be breaking down barriers that are causing friction and stunting growth. But we must also go further than focusing purely on the economics. I benefited immensely from my own lived experience as an Erasmus exchange student at the University of Hanover in Germany. And that's why I firmly believe in a bright future for Britain as a nation, which must grasp the opportunity on youth mobility with Europe. It's time to back British businesses, back British workers, and back Britain's rightful place as a key European nation.
Thank you. Vicky Slade.
Serve under your chairmanship. More and more people across the UK now recognise leaving the EU has come at a cost that has made us all poorer, and like the member for Bournemouth East, I suspect even my dad. Alistair, though, rightly points out that there has never been a comprehensive, independent and trusted review of the full cost of Brexit. He's one of my constituents. But if there were, I suspect the findings would be deeply sobering. Because in an increasingly unstable global landscape shaped by shifting US politics and rising tariffs, it's more important than ever that we secure strong, stable trading links with Europe. And a recent YouGov poll of over 15,000 people showed nearly half want trade with the EU as a top priority, compared to just 22% who prioritise America. One area that deserves urgent focus is defence, and I declare an interest as a proud member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Armed Forces and a member of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme. We cannot ignore the growing pressure to spend more on defence, especially as the US steps away from NATO. But if we're going to invest more, let's do so by working with trusted European partners, not by handing more contracts to US defence giants. We must ensure that spending supports British jobs and British industries, and we make it easier for EU to invest in our market-leading UK businesses, like those based in my constituency, like Atlas Electronic, and those across Dorset, like Battle Lab. Another area is, of course, the veterinary agreement. This gap in policy is having a serious impact on UK farmers, who are already reeling from the consequences of the Conservatives' botched trade deal and this government's damaging and short-sighted budget changes. Without proper arrangements for animal health and streamlined border checks, exports have dropped. Yet research from Aston University shows that a veterinary agreement with the EU could boost exports by at least 22.5%. And that's confirmed by major retailers, including Sainsbury's, Lidl and Marks & Spencer's, who called for a veterinary deal, writing in the Financial Times that red tape is driving up the costs of food and drink. We've heard ministers express support, but no progress. This must change. It's time to rebuild our relationship with the EU. Let's put forward a modern trade deal that strengthens cooperation on defence, food, farming, a much-needed youth mobility scheme, and brings us into a customs union, even if for political reasons it needs to have another name. We owe it to our businesses, our farmers, our young people and the future of the UK. Let's be honest about what's gone wrong, and let's start putting it right.
Catherine Fuchs.
To serve under your chairship. And thank you to the member for Welwyn Hatfield. So the post-Brexit trade deals delivered by the previous Conservative government have just been appalling. They haven't worked well for Wales. We have been flooded with New Zealand lamb. And as we all know in this room, Welsh lamb is, of course, the best tasting lamb in the world. So I congratulate Minister Thomas Symonds for the work he is doing and is going to continue to do on an SPS deal. We desperately need this, but we don't just need that for our hard-pressed farmers. We also need that for the businesses that we've got in my constituency of Monmouthshire. And I recently had a business roundtable with businesses like TXO, Silkbuster, Green Meadow and others. And what they said to me is they are drowning. I think out of the 2 billion pieces of paper that were mentioned earlier, my constituency of Monmouthshire, the businesses must have 1 billion of them because they are drowning in paperwork. It's slowing them down. And to be honest, when I met with them after my 2-hour business roundtable, I was astonished and amazed that they had all stayed in Monmouthshire, employing local people, and continue to face the barrage of barriers that they do and the administration that they have to do. And the number one thing they need is we need to remove some of those trade barriers. We need to, and in order to do that and to smooth their trade, we need to keep our standards the same as those in the EU. And that was the number one priority of all those businesses. So I congratulate you and the others that signed the letter saying that. And we really must have regulatory alignment if we are to grow. And we must remember that this government's number one mission is economic growth. And so if we align with EU standards and we continue to grow our trade with the EU, that's exactly what we'll get. I'm delighted to be a member of the EU parliamentary PPA. Partnership Assembly. Sorry, I have a problem with acronyms. And I was delighted to go to Brussels recently. And we were welcomed with open arms by our MEP colleagues because they said, the grown-ups are back in the room. We're delighted with the leadership of Keir Starmer bringing us closer to Europe. So I encourage the government to continue to do this work. Thank you.
Sarah Olney.
Thank you, Jeremy. Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to congratulate the member for Welwyn Hatfield for his work in securing this debate. We've seen over the past few months the extent to which the current US administration is no longer a reliable ally. Yeah. We can see the extraordinary damage being caused by the implementation of Trump's tariffs on trading relationships around the world. With the increasingly unpredictable and aggressive signals coming from across the Atlantic, this must be the moment to stand firmly with our European neighbours for our national security, economic stability and to strengthen our trading relationships. So the UK-EU summit next month in London, hosted by the Prime Minister, will be an opportunity that must be seized for us to move on from the warm words of pragmatism which we have heard from the government but which are no longer good enough. We must move forward, and the government must commit to serious action to rebuild our relationship with Europe. Whilst we know that the long-term well-being of the UK is to be back in the heart of Europe, that requires strengthened trading agreements and a customs union. Closer ties with Europe are also key to our national security. We're glad that there are serious indications that the government will commit to a defence agreement with Europe, but this must be just the beginning. There are broader partnerships with our European neighbours which the Liberal Democrats will continue to call for, which would be advantageous to British businesses. We know that a youth mobility deal would be good for our economy, especially our tourism and hospitality sectors, while providing young British people the opportunity to work and study abroad. And this is exactly the kind of pragmatic step that we hope the government will take at the upcoming summit. Having spent the last 5 years grappling with the bureaucracy of Brexit, increased trading costs, many business owners across the country will now be deeply concerned by the additional challenges to businesses coming from Washington. The returning Trump administration has fundamentally changed trading relations globally and has created an obvious moment for us to take action to establish closer trading relationships with our European neighbours. The EU is our closest neighbour and our largest trading partner, but the botched Brexit deal has been a complete disaster for this country, especially for small businesses who are held back by reams of red tape and new barriers to trade, costing our economy billions in lost exports. So I urge the government to acknowledge the damage that the Conservatives' Brexit regulation has done and continues to do, not just to individual businesses, but to the economy as a whole, and take the sensible step of negotiating a new UK-EU customs union to ease the pressure which so many businesses are under. Thank you, Sir Chairman.
Thank you. Joe Powell.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve under your Chairship, and I thank my honourable friend for Welland Hatfield for securing this debate, and to all the ministers who are working flat out on the European reset. As others have said, the instability and conflict on European soil has changed the context in our continent, but the context has also changed globally, with long-held assumptions about globalisation, trade and economic certainty breaking down rapidly. So the case for strong partnerships with like-minded countries based on free and frictionless trade, shared values and political trust has never been clearer, as the Chancellor has set out in Washington this week. I was elected last July to be the MP for Kensington and Bayswater, the most international constituency in the country, and I stood on a clear promise to those residents that I would be a pro-European voice in Parliament and advocate for a closer, more pragmatic UK-EU relationship after years of chaos under the Conservatives. The global businesses, the world-class institutions like Imperial, the international trade hubs, and most importantly, the blended families from all over the world all say the same thing to me, that uncertainty and red tape from this current shambolic deal have hurt investment, jobs, growth and family relationships and have hit our economy to the tune of £100 billion. My constituents didn't vote for more trade barriers and bureaucracy. They voted for cooperation, opportunity and a shared future with Europe. So first, on security, I think we need to go further, deepening defence cooperation between the UK and the EU to stand firm against Putin's aggression. Whenever I meet my Ukrainian community, at our social club, at the embassy, at our school, I'm reminded exactly what's at stake in the EU-UK Defence Pact, going further on procurement, intelligence sharing, as we've done with Germany, on stopping people smuggling, shows what we can achieve together. Second, for our young people, we must open doors, not keep them closed. I've met so many young people who dream of studying, working and living in Europe. And so we should negotiate a bespoke youth mobility scheme for UK and EU citizens under 30, as we have with other countries, including Australia and Canada. It's not about returning to free movement, it's about creating time-limited opportunities that benefit the next generation, and we should embrace it as a positive step, not something to be feared or talked down, but to be embraced. And third, we need to embrace these practical steps that others have talked about to make a real difference for British businesses in terms of trade. So this is a critical few weeks for our trading relationship with Europe. From von der Leyen's visit today to the summit on May 19th, it's time for maximum ambition, and the government has my full support in doing that.
The Honourable Gentleman, can I tell all members I'm going to call the front benches at 4:25, so again, discipline will be required if everyone's going to get in. Monica Harding.
To serve under your chairmanship, Sir Jeremy, and I want to thank the member for Welland Hatfield for securing this debate. The UK's trading relationship with the European Union goes beyond trade barriers. It begs a fundamental question. In an increasingly dangerous and volatile world, do we wish to be adrift and isolated or stand united with our closest neighbours? The EU, despite Brexit, remains our largest trading partner. A market of 450 million consumers lies on our doorstep, and the government is still failing to leverage that proximity. Despite its search for growth, apparently their one overriding mission, the botched Brexit deal has inflicted deep and lasting damage to our economy. Our trade volume is 15% lower and long-term productivity is 4% lower. And for what? We still wait for the US trade deal, unlikely to be where we need it under the American First Presidency. Our current arrangements with the European Union are fragmented and bureaucratic, actively undermining our growth and prosperity. The consequences of Brexit are stark, and my constituents in East and Walton have been badly affected. Higher prices, strained budgets. My local businesses that once traded seamlessly now face mountains of paperwork and costly delays. Meanwhile, the promised benefits of Brexit remain unseen, and the ramifications of this broken relationship have become even more apparent following recent developments across the Atlantic. The steel tariffs on British exports have dispelled the fantasy that the UK-US trade deal would compensate for Brexit damage. As we face a stagnating economy, the government cannot seriously claim to be exploring all the ways to boost growth by staying within the last Conservative government's red lines on Europe. The Liberal Democrats are the only party offering a credible solution, forming a customs union with the European Union, revitalising our trade, providing certainty and optimism workable and achievable, and sending a sign to rogue actors and special relationships that we are united and determined in the face of aggression, even trade aggression. If the government are really serious about growth, they must show the leadership our country needs, follow the trade, follow the money, and undo the botched Brexit deal that bust our country.
Stella Creasy. Don't worry, keep going.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to be part of today's debate. It's less than 100 days since Donald Trump was elected to the White House. In those 100 days, I hope we have finally seen the end to the myth that somehow leaving the European Union and isolating ourselves would increase our sovereignty when we are now uniquely exposed to world events, whether tariffs, the action of President Putin, or indeed our ability to influence the concerns we might have in Israel and Palestine. The public are paying the price, and they deserve better from all of us. Let us be frank, blue passports are no substitute for British jobs. But I do not come here today to say I told you so, but to play my part in fixing it. And in the short time available to me, I want to say maybe the MPs are getting younger, but too often in this debate, the debates are old. So let me reassure the opposition spokesperson. I declare an interest as the chair of the Labour Movement for Europe, but I do not come here to campaign for rejoin. We have left the European Union. I come to campaign for my constituents and people across this country who need the jobs and growth that a reset with Europe will offer. To move on from the red lines of the old debates to looking at what is in our mutual interests and the summit ahead of us on May the 19th. I agree with many of the points that colleagues have made, so let me try to offer two further points, particularly given that President von der Leyen is here today and has talked about the importance of us working together on regulation. The Energy Summit, particularly in addressing the carbon border adjustment mechanism. I agree very much with my colleague from the business community about that. UK exporters of energy will pay the price. That is our electricity industry, our steel industry, our ceramics industry and more, if we do not tackle the impact of having a different emissions trading scheme. So too, we have to tackle all the paperwork. We in the Labour Movement of Europe are the reds against the red tape. So yes, we need to deal with PEM. We also need to deal with the SPS, and we need to deal with the VAT differences that people are dealing with. Farmers, the chemical industry, BTOM and car industries will all be beneficial if we tackle all those things. And yes, of course, we need a visa system. We haven't got time to talk about rejoin. It would take too long, but we can do something about the 17,000 businesses who stopped trading with Europe. And if we do that, we will bring back the British jobs and the British growth that we so desperately need. And I look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say about it.
Thank you. Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Sir Jeffrey. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Welwyn Hatfield, for bringing this critical debate. It is an understatement to say that since the US elections, the plates of international politics have been shifting, especially since the Trump presidency announced the introduction of trade tariffs. British people are rethinking their opinions, and one welcome consequence of that process is in relation to the EU. An opinion poll commissioned by the TUC and conducted earlier this month found that 2 in 3 Brits now back a closer relationship with the EU, with just 20% opposed. This includes key target voters, such as 8 in 10 Conservative to Labour switchers at the 2024 election, and more than half of reform-leaning voters who voted Labour but may now vote Reform. This is perhaps not too surprising. As we have heard, according to official figures, the long-term impact of the UK leaving the single market and customs union is a loss of between 4 to 8% of our GDP. As Trump seeks to raise trade barriers, it feels like a no-brainer that we should be seeking to reduce ours with our closest neighbours. Research by the think tank already referenced found that a deal with the EU that included deeper alignment on goods and services would completely offset the impact of US tariffs for the UK. Unfortunately, to date, the government seems so in fear of being accused by the right for being too close to the EU to lead decisively on this issue. The Prime Minister's earlier rejection of the EU's proposal for a youth mobility scheme, with the UK just being one area where the government has balked at acting in the national interest. Along with the many others, I hope the Prime Minister adopts an approach less driven by the fear of reform at the next month's EU-UK summit. Although I voted to remain, I believe it is important that the democratic will of the people is respected, but it is also important that we are honest with the people about the lies they were told and the harms that Brexit has brought our nation. It is therefore time to stop being afraid to speak the truth about the damage of Brexit and to act in the national interests and it now is the perfect time to start writing a new chapter and move towards a more positive trading relationship with the EU.
Right.
Member for Welling Hatfield for securing this debate. As members have already stated so eloquently, it is time for a pragmatic reset in our relationship with our nearest neighbours and oldest partners. This is not about reopening old wounds, but about fixing the harm done to our economy and our security by mistakes under the last government, and recognising that our future prosperity can be improved with better UK-EU relations. As members on this side of the House have referenced in our joint letters to the Secretary of State, we live in a period of increasing global instability. Certainties based on the post-World War II roles-based systems of trade are breaking down, and our stability, prosperity and security rely on having deep and resilient partnerships with like-minded nations. Therefore, we will be stronger when we work with, not against our neighbours. That principle must guide our approach to Europe. We already see the benefits of cooperation in the emerging UK-European defence partnership, standing together with Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression, bolstering European security and demonstrating that our shared values of democracy and rule of law are more than just words. This is an area that must be deepened for the good of our joint defence and security. Trade, too, should be an urgent area for renewal. There are many areas of UK-EU trade that we should aim to ease, have been referenced across the debate today. One area that should be looked at also anew would be the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention, already used by many of our European neighbours, which offers a model for streamlined trade across borders without being a member of an EU institution. It simplifies rules of origin, cuts red tape and helps goods move faster. The government should be proactively exploring our alignment with this system. It will be good for many of my SMEs in Exeter. Yes, briefly.
In addition to those points about trade and those really important points that have been made around this chamber about defence, would my honourable friend agree with me that we should also be considering a cultural touring agreement, because that will support cultural organisations across the country, the Barbican, the Royal Opera House, the West End, and not only them and their business, but for people to come to London and to support economic growth across the country.
I thank you for that intervention, and indeed it would very much help with the cultural institutions in my constituency in Exeter as well. So I absolutely agree. Thank you. Since the end of the transition period, UK exports to the EU have faced barriers that did not exist before, with small businesses disproportionately hit. According to the OER, our overall trade intensity has fallen by 15% compared to where it should have been. This is not inevitable. It was a policy choice by the last government, and this government can and should choose differently. Closer economic ties means growth. They mean investment in green energy, in digital infrastructure, in research, all sectors where Exeter is already leading the way. And they could now also mean opportunity for our next generation, for our young people to study, to work and to thrive across our shared continent. Mr Chairman, this is not about going back, it is about going forward, clear-eyed, ambitious for our future and in partnership with those who share our values and interests. My residents in Exeter deserve that future, our country deserves that future, and I encourage the government to be ambitious for that future at the next summit. Thank you.
Liam Conlon.
And I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Welling Hatfield, today on securing today's debate. In the very limited time available, I'll make 2 points. One is around the importance of economic cooperation, and the second is in support of a youth mobility scheme. Over Easter, I had the pleasure of spending time in Northern Ireland, which coincided with the 27th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. Reflecting on that, there is no greater example of how trade with the EU and trade more generally are always about more than goods and services. They're about people, fundamentally. The creation of the single market in 1993 brought down physical barriers and borders, and with it diluted notions of allegiance and notions of us and them. Economic cooperation paved the way for one of the greatest political acts of the 21st century. And it's also a reminder that we must reject the isolationism that we are seeing in countries around the world today. We should be proud to work with countries, proud of that cooperation, and tied to that, I know that there's a lot of support in Beckenham and Penge for a youth mobility scheme. In fact, I have with me this week 2 work experience students who are in the gallery today, James and Paola, and we were talking at lunchtime today about that, and it's a right that I enjoyed growing up, and I think that the next generation should be entitled to that as well. So I'd ask the government, look, the shift in language to our closest neighbours and friends has been significant over the past 9 months, and it is welcomed. And I would ask the government to carry on and continue on this, to be bold ahead of the EU-UK summit next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben Coleman.
I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Welling Hatfield, on calling this really very important debate. I'm very pleased because it's not often that we get a chance as members of Parliament to so clearly speak about what we do to represent the British interest, our members' interests, our constituents into the British interests. And our job here as members of Parliament is to keep our country strong and secure, with a strong economy and strong defence, and to provide opportunity to everyone, not least our young people. And that, it seems to me, is what this debate is about. It's about promoting the British interest. The British interest lies at the heart of why we need to get a better deal from the European Union, one which gets growth for our country in perhaps the swiftest way possible at a time when this government is so committed to growth, by lowering the barriers of red tape which have come out of the hopeless deal that the last government patched so feebly together. And we especially need to lower the barriers, as has been said, the barriers for small and medium-sized firms which have been hit hardest. And I think here of the specialist wine importer in my constituency has to pay an extra £160 for every shipment.
Would my honourable friend allow me to...
Yes, happily.
Following the Tory Brexit deal, thank you, Sir Jeremy. Following the Tory Brexit deal, we've seen lorries backing up from Dover through Folkestone and Hythe in my constituency and deep into Kent. Now we have customs and immigration checks. So would my honourable friend agree with me that a deal to eliminate food and drink barriers being exported to the EU would help reduce friction at Dover and throughout our road network?
I absolutely would agree that a veterinary agreement is absolutely what we need to improve the situation in our country. I agree with the proposal to allow British bands and creatives to tour more easily, that we should have more mutual recognition of professional qualifications to support our service industries. We should be as ambitious as we can, and we should therefore also start talking about a deal to end regulatory divergence, so companies don't have to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on 2 sets of standards, 2 sets of testing regimes. Because the current situation we face as a result of the deal the Conservative government negotiated is not patriotism, it is self-sabotage, and we need to do something about it. So yes, part of that means we also need to do more to give opportunity for our young people, and that's why I support having a controlled youth visa scheme that provides just that opportunity. Finally, Chair, if I may, let me just turn to defence, which has been mentioned by some of my colleagues here today. The UK has a huge role to play in the defence of our continent, and I think there are no European countries that doubt that. In fact, the UK and the European Union to sign a new security agreement is clearly in all our interests, right across Europe. Stronger defence, new jobs in the UK and right across the continent. And that is why I think our government has to be absolutely clear with some other countries in the European Union. Defence and security cooperation are too fundamental to dealing with the challenges facing our countries at the moment, and they must be decoupled from other political negotiations. They're too important to be tied to debates about fishing rights or quotas. So, Sir Jeremy, we need cool-headed, determined, ambitious negotiations with the European Union that back Britain. And we need that. In that way, we can get the better deal for my constituents in Chelsea and Fulham and the better deal for the British people that they deserve.
Thank you. Martin Rhodes.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairing. Due to the limited time, I will focus on one particular area, and that is the UK's creative industries, particularly music and the performing arts. The Department for Culture, Media and Sport estimate that music, performing arts and visual arts add approximately £11.2 billion to the UK economy annually and employ 283,000 people. Without dedicated provisions in the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement, performers, artists and production teams face the challenge of navigating different regulations in each of the 27 EU member states. each with its own administrative and financial barriers. While larger and more established acts may absorb these challenges, they pose disproportionate barriers for emerging talent. Furthermore, this is acting as a barrier to cultural exchange between the EU and the UK. Ease of travel for these artists and musicians helps strengthen relationships and business connections across the continent, helping both cultural scenes thrive. While I welcome assurances from the government that it is seeking some form of specific cultural carve-out or at least allowances for music rules, performing arts and culture touring, there remains a greater need for a systemic change for the creative industry's access to Europe and vice versa. That's why I urge the government to consider a dedicated cultural mobility agreement with the EU, or at the very least a meaningful cultural exemption, to safeguard the future of our creative industries and restore the cultural exchange that has long enriched both the EU and the UK. I hope the Minister can say something on this in his response coming up shortly.
Thank you. Uma Kumaran.
I commend my friend for the honourable member for Welland and Hatfield for securing this important debate. I proudly stood on a Labour manifesto that placed growth at the heart of this government's missions, and that goal has never been more necessary after Labour inherited a stagnating economy from the Conservatives. In turbulent economic and diplomatic climate that we find ourselves in, it would be inexplicable not to recognise our geographically and economically closest trading partner, the European Union, as a key partner for growth. I'm pleased this government has set to seek a reset with the European partners, and the next step is the upcoming EU-UK summit. I too was part of the UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, who we travelled to Brussels with many other colleagues here. We were welcomed as friends and allies, and they were pleased that Britain was back as a partner. But I want to touch on just one point in the short time I have, the SPS agreement. It's a trade agreement focused on ensuring food safety and protecting animal and plant health. Earlier this month, as Vice Chair of the APPG on Conservation, I was fortunate enough to visit the ZSL London, and I met their pygmy hippo, Amara. You may wonder why I'm talking about a pygmy hippo. There are more parliamentary pass holders on this estate than there are pygmy hippos in the wild. And while I was there, I learnt more about the work that they're doing to help bring species back from extinction. By working across borders, ensuring genetically diverse and healthy populations exist, organisations like ZSL and their partners around the world are actively bringing species back from the brink, ranging from the scimitar-horned oryx to the Partula snail, which just a few weeks ago was downlisted from being extinct in the wild to critically endangered. But this has been put at risk. Transfers that would have once just taken weeks to complete are now taking months or even years because of the new misalignment between ourselves and the EU. It could be solved as part of an ambitious SPS agreement, but the government needs to make sure that this is included as part of the discussions. So I'd like to ask the Minister in his remarks today to touch on if this is something that he's considered, and if so, whether he plans to raise it with his EU counterparts. It may sound like a small change, but it's one that could have species-defining consequences for us and our planet.
Thank you very much. We have two speakers to come, 3 minutes for them to share. Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. Yesterday, I visited Hinkley Point C, the largest building site in Europe, an international project built through close collaboration with European partners, a powerful example of trade and cooperation with Europe essential to our success. Now, Big Carl was at work. It's the largest crane in the world, manufactured by Sarens in Belgium, imported to Britain because it's the only crane capable of doing the job. Now, Big Carl is just one example of why a smooth trading relationship is essential. British businesses thrive by selling into the European market, and they rely on importing specialised goods that only Europe provides. Now, back home in Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket, we can see how vital the relationship is. We have one of the largest centres of paint and coating productions in the country. PPG Industries runs a major manufacturing facility in Stowmarket with 350 people, mixing paints and coatings shipped around the world. Akzo Nobel, a Dutch paint company, employs 150 people, nearly 500 people working in the industry out of a national workforce of 1,400. But they're deeply entwined with the EU. Under the previous government, they faced sharp increases in costs due to the barriers, and they've had to contend with diverging chemical rules. They faced logistic headaches, importing raw materials. But these are large companies. Imagine how much harder for small businesses. Beautiful Beers specialises in selling fantastic Belgian beers imported from the continent. René faces a bureaucratic nightmare. He's doing it alone, struggling I've heard the same story from businesses all over the place. Since Brexit, getting goods through customs has become a major hurdle, so we need to sort this out with a UK-EU customs cooperation. The previous government left businesses in the country in a mess, and Bury St Edmunds in the worst possible situation. So I'm really glad that this government is beginning to sort things out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And all too briefly, Perrin Moon.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Jeremy. It's an honour to serve under your chairship, and I congratulate my honourable friend from Welwyn Hatfield on securing the debate at such a timely moment in terms of our relationship with the European Union at such a time of global insecurity. As a Cornishman, I would like to highlight my concerns raised to me by our fishing industry. Their daily reality is far from the post-Brexit panacea that promised so much and delivered so little to the fishermen in my constituency of Campbell, Redruth and Hale.
Thank you for giving way. Given the willingness, the readiness of other parties, including one auspiciously absent from this very crucial debate, to throw our fishers under the bus and put fishing fleets back into a status as a political football, will he join me and the member for Fulham and Chelsea in calling on our government to ensure that this will not happen and that we will protect, above all, employment in our fishing fleets in Madagascar and elsewhere?
A typically perceptive Cornish intervention from my right honourable friend. As I was saying, it's the fishermen, not just in my constituency, in Cornwall and across the UK. In their report on EU relations, the Business and Trade Committee pointed out that the fruits of the sea around our borders are part of our shared ecology and must be managed carefully to protect the livelihoods of future generations. The businesses and livelihoods in these fishing communities must not be bargaining chips, as some media outlets suggest, but are in fact invaluable elements of local economies that must be protected and strengthened. At the same time, we must make progress towards reducing trade barriers with our trading partners in the EU. The former is crucial to the latter because the current and future negotiations by the government have to bring the British people with them, including our fishing industry. I hope the Minister will confirm that the government is working towards a fair deal for our fisheries that will secure their long-term stability. This is a moment for our government to provide leadership that was so severely lacking from the last government's half-baked negotiations. Whilst there are larger and higher profile sectors, as we've heard, that will form the basis of these negotiations, providing the reassurance our vital fishing communities fishing communities whilst protecting the fishing stocks must not be abandoned as part of these delicate negotiations.
Thank you very much. Can I thank all backbench colleagues for their cooperation? It's very much appreciated. And we move on to the front bench speeches, beginning with the Liberal Democrat spokesman, James McCleary.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, sir, and I'll add my congratulations to the member for Welwyn Hatfield for securing this timely debate, and my thanks to all honourable members for their contributions today, considered and well informed. And I think it shows that the discussion has perhaps moved on from whether we need to improve our trading relationship with the European Union to how we improve our trading relationship with the European Union. I think that's an important step in the right direction. It is beyond dispute that our current trading relationship with the European Union has been profoundly damaging to our economy. Businesses across the country, small businesses, farmers and fishers, have borne the brunt of the Conservatives' botched Brexit deal, facing layers of unnecessary red tape and barriers that have strangled trade, dampened growth and undermined prosperity. The numbers speak for themselves. British exports to the EU fell sharply after Brexit and have yet to recover, remaining 11% below their 2019 levels. Astonishingly, 4 out of every 10 British products once stocked on EU shelves have now vanished. For farmers and fishers, the impact has been starkly illustrated by a leap from a simple form to an absurd 21-step bureaucratic nightmare, leaving our produce literally unable to cross the Channel. British sausages, once sold freely from Paris to Berlin, are now banned outright. A frankly absurd situation that captures perfectly the farcical outcome that disastrous deal negotiated by the last government brought us. But this isn't merely about statistics, it's about livelihoods. I speak regularly to small businesses in my constituency who tell me directly that their market shrank overnight, while the complexity and cost of doing business with the rest of Europe have ballooned. Our farmers face financial uncertainty, and fishers, including my local fishing fleet in Newhaven, promised prosperity by Brexit campaigners, now struggle under an avalanche of paperwork and export costs, which put their livelihoods at risk. We urgently need a new approach, a pragmatic, ambitious plan to rebuild our relationship with Europe and reinvigorate our economy. And yet, disappointingly, the new government appears to lack precisely the ambition we need, ruling out even common sense measures such as recently as today, a youth mobility scheme, which could restore opportunities for young Britons to live, work and study abroad. This government is wrapped in their self-defeating red lines, which seem more designed to please the leadership of Reform UK than they are to benefiting British business and growth. I was, however, glad to see the Honourable Member for Welland Hatfield has signed a letter along with 70 of his colleagues calling for a youth mobility scheme this morning. It's really encouraging to see that kind of resolve from across the House. But contrast that with the government's response today. When my Liberal Democrat colleague, the Honourable Member for Richmond Park, questioned them on it earlier, the answer was a resounding no. When is this government going to get serious? The EU will simply move on if we don't show clear and consistent intent in time for the EU-UK summit in May. We cannot afford to squander what goodwill remains. That's why the Liberal Democrats have proposed a clear four-step roadmap to heal our fractured ties with Europe, starting immediately with unilateral steps to restore goodwill and trust. This must include re-engaging proactively in vital foreign policy dialogues. We then need to rebuild confidence by rejoining crucial European programmes like Erasmus+, participating actively in scientific collaborations and reconnecting with essential bodies such as the European Aviation Safety Agency. Central to our economic recovery must be deeper trade cooperation, particularly through a comprehensive veterinary and plant health agreement, which has already been mentioned, and mutual recognition of professional qualifications, therefore immediately removing significant barriers to British businesses. Most importantly, we must place ourselves firmly on the path to negotiating a robust customs union by 2030. This step alone would strip away needless checks and bureaucracy at our borders, injecting desperately needed momentum back into our economy. It's vital to understand what a customs union could achieve. It means tariff-free, streamlined trade for most goods, a practical, proven solution already successfully embraced by other countries outside the EU. A customs union would place Britain back at the heart of European trade, boosting our economy and insulating us from the unpredictable global disruptions, especially from protectionist forces we see emerging in the United States. Even a signal from this government that they are open to a new customs union would boost markets and stimulate growth. Indeed, recent experiences under Trump's aggressive tariff regime have demonstrated clearly that we need leverage in global trade discussions, something a customs union with our largest and nearest trading partner could provide. Instead of begging for special deals from America, we could strengthen our relationship with Europe, rebuilding from a position of strength rather than weakness. In closing, Chair, we cannot afford more timid half measures or missed opportunities. British businesses, workers and young people deserve better. The Liberal Democrats are clear and unwavering. We must restore confidence, rebuild trust and revitalise our economic ties with Europe. The public are watching. Will this government be defined by cuts to international development, winter fuel payments for pensioners and job-killing taxes on small businesses? Or will it instead take the hard-headed, pragmatic decision to ditch its disastrous red lines and enter into negotiations for a customs union so that Britain can truly regain the strong, prosperous economy its citizens deserve?
Shadow Secretary of State Andrew Griffith.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to congratulate the member for Welland Hatfield for securing this debate and for so many colleagues who've contributed into your chairmanship in getting so many colleagues the chance to do so. I'd also like to commend the efforts of the Select Committee, who have indeed come up with a report that contains many worthy and sensible suggestions. Mr. Chairman, we owe it to British businesses that create growth, jobs, the wealth of our country, to secure for them the most favourable terms for the UK in that tapestry of global trade, wherever those markets may be. That means focusing on areas of maximum opportunity, wherever they are, on areas and sectors where we could benefit from growing markets, innovation, and indeed our shared values. We all seek more trade with our European neighbours, but we already have a tariff-free deal for the export and imports of goods. There are some wins to be had. The European Central Bank, for example, restoring clearing to the UK, pragmatic, sensible, a reflection of the facts on the ground. But these opportunities don't seem to be, perhaps the Minister will correct us, what the government is focused upon. In fact, it's clear that Labour's EU reset, perhaps to the welcome of many of the Minister's colleagues, is actually a carried forward plan made in opposition, dating back to the referendum in 2016, with the objective of overturning in substance, if not in name, that referendum. And I say in all seriousness and with grave concern that when at a time all of us across all Western democracies, this is not a phenomena limited, I won't give way because everybody's been very good on timing, and I'll get through and give the Minister as much chance as possible to deal with all of the points that have been raised. But in all seriousness, when we across all Western European economies face a real crisis of trust in politics, a rise of extremities, people who wouldn't necessarily see the solutions to the problems that their countries face as to arguing them out in reasonable fashion, in a reasonable way, as we are today. Why any genuine Democrat, whatever their personal views, could possibly think that reversing a decision made by the people in 2016 is the right approach. And though it's refreshing to make common cause with the member for Walthamstow, who indeed doesn't do that, and it's also refreshing of sorts to see at least the honesty of the honourable member for Lewis in misguided, but at least the honest approach of their desire to return to the rule of Brussels via a full customs union, which I understand is not on the government's agenda. Now, we Conservatives, just to make process quickly, we Conservatives have set out 5 clear tests to protect that trust, that confidence of people. The first is not to backslide on free movement, no new money to be paid to the European Union, no reduction in our fishing rights. That includes, and I'll take an intervention from the honourable member for the Green Party if she would like, but that includes no backsliding on the environmental protection for sand eels that the RSPB has said is vital to the protection of British seabirds and puffins. I see no intervention coming, so I'll move on. But which the EU are litigating the British government right now in courts to prevent that environmental protection measure. No rule-taking, dynamic or alignment or the ECG jurisdiction, and notwithstanding working with anybody on a defence pact, and I agree with the honourable member, there must be no co-linkage between defending European soil and the transactional approach by some countries to British fishing. But that includes no undermining or compromise on the primacy of NATO. Those are the tests that will maintain, in our view, the trust of the British people, and I hope the Minister will put our fears at that to rest. The Product Regulation and Metrology Bill, currently before Parliament, is perhaps one of the most blatant examples of how a government may fail the test. It's a Trojan horse, it's a blank cheque to force this government to become a rule taker. And I realise that many colleagues are new in this place, many aren't, and have much more distinguished service than myself. But I hope that colleagues, when they look at that bill, will, as the House of Lords Constitution Committee and the Delegated Legislation Committee, will look at the deficiencies in that bill under this or any other government going forward. We've heard today calls for a return to open borders via a youth mobility scheme. That would, and whilst we may all seek, and the previous governments have put in place youth mobility schemes at a certain level of volume, it would be interesting to hear about, as the government considers doing that, what will be the impact on British graduates whose wage premium is at the lowest it's ever been. What will be the impact? What will be the impact on the existing rental crisis in London from opening the floodgates? And what will be the impact on the burdens of the NHS? There was some talk about an ability to improve education, but we already have visa schemes for work, and we already have visa schemes to come here and study. What will be the incrementality of a youth mobility scheme? And we heard a number of examples about this being a moment for cool heads, not for piling on retaliatory tariffs in a global trade war. Members will commend themselves on how progressive and level-headed they are. But let's just be balanced in that. It wasn't the US that unilaterally threatened to invoke Article 16 to prevent British citizens having access to vaccines. It wasn't the US that kicked the United Kingdom out of Horizon, an entirely separate scheme from our membership of the European Union. And it's still not the US that is depriving British citizens of the use of e-gates when they travel, an opportunity that we afford visitors from the EU coming to this country. So let's just have some balance in that debate. And to be clear, Sir Jeremy, given the relative scale of the opportunity and the fact that we already have a free trade goods deal with the European Union, had we been in government, Conservatives would have prioritised right now a US trade deal. It's been 170 days since President Trump was elected. The government has yet to publish any objectives for its negotiations with the US. So whatever you think of those, British exporters right now today are paying the price of the absence of that agreement, but also Parliament, through that absence of transparency, Parliament is being disrespected, and none of us have any idea which businesses or which farm sectors may pay the price of that deal in future. So, Jeremy, our hard-won freedoms offer us the unrivalled chance, if we seize it, to steer our own course in a difficult and uncertain world. We can have the best of all worlds. Trade with Europe, trade with North America, with the Gulf, with Asia, and with Africa. Conservatives would not pursue one of those many attractive opportunities in a prejudiced way at the expense of others, and I hope that is also the government's position.
Thank you. I'll call the Minister. He has until 4:55 if he wants it, but if he's feeling generous, he may want to leave the member in charge a couple of minutes to wind up. Douglas Alexander.
Firstly, let me say, Sir Jeremy, thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'll certainly endeavour to extend that generosity. Let me begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Welwyn Hatfield, for securing what's an important and timely debate, and commend him for his ongoing work on this issue as the chair of the UK Trade and Business Commission. The letter that he and a number of the parliamentary colleagues who are represented in the chamber today submitted to the Minister for the Cabinet Office, who of course leads for the government on UK-EU relationships, made some excellent points, many of which I will endeavour to address in the course of my remarks today. I'll also seek to specifically address the three main points, MRPQ, broader alignment and the youth mobility scheme, that he raised in his introductory speech. I would also like to thank all of those who have spoken today. First, I'd like to set out why we must use our strengthened relations with the EU to deliver a long-term UK-EU strategic alliance that grows our economy. And frankly, I've listened with care to the remarks that we have just heard from the official opposition spokesman, suggesting that if the Conservative Party had been in office, we would have the best of all worlds. I have to say I struggle to reconcile that with the universe that the rest of us live in the sense that not only did that government abjectly fail to secure a trade agreement with the United States, but they alienated our closest trading partners in the European Union, and we're in the deep freeze in relation to China. So it's not entirely clear to me as to what this grand strategy for the Conservatives post-Brexit involved. Let's just consider the numbers for a moment. In trade, geography still matters. As a bloc, the European Union is still the UK's largest trading market, covering fully 46%, but £813 billion worth of our trade. And it's important to note that the UK is the EU's second largest trade partner. But unfortunately, UK exports to the EU in 2024 were fully 5% lower than they were back in 2018, which is the most recent stable pre-Brexit, pre-COVID year for comparison, and UK imports for the EU have remained level at about plus 0.4%. Moreover, our overall trade performance globally continues to suffer, and we are lagging behind our G7 peers. Our trade flows globally in 2024 were only 4% above 2018 levels, while other G7 economies have seen an average trade growth of 8%. So what explains these trends? Well, there's an increasing body of external research studies, such as those of LSE's Centre for Economic Performance and Aston University, that demonstrate that Brexit accounts for these changes, which is why it is both in the UK and in the EU's interests to strengthen our trading relationship. Let me turn now to some of the specific points raised in the course of the debate. The Honourable Member for Arbroath and Broughty Ferry, who's in his position, who I have to say on a personal level I like and admire, gave a sadly rather partisan speech in woeful denial of the fact, for example, that had his side prevailed in the 2014 referendum in Scotland, we would have found ourselves outside of the European Union. A politics of manufactured grievance, flags and new borders is as wrong in Scotland as it is here in England, and thankfully Scotland made its choice to support a sensible, pragmatic internationalist party just back in July. I'm keen to make some progress. My right honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Hodge Hill, made what I could only describe as a characteristically brilliant speech. A judgment I make in no way related to the fact that he is, of course, the chair of the Business and Trade Select Committee. In all seriousness, though, he brought, fresh from the spring meetings in Washington this week, a wider geopolitical perspective to our debate that, of course, frames the conversations that are happening today between the Commission President von der Leyen and Prime Minister Keir Starmer. I note all the points that were made by the member for Bristol Central. I would simply say that when I see those images of Prime Minister Keir Starmer meeting President Trump in the Oval Office, or today meeting EU Commission President von der Leyen, or at that Lancaster House summit, or sitting previously with President Macron in Paris, personally I feel a sense of relief and change. Change that the clown show is over, and relief that we have a serious Prime Minister for these serious times. My honourable friend, the member for Bournemouth East, in a strikingly personal speech, spoke eloquently of the divisions we witnessed within families and communities at the time of the Brexit referendum, which helps explain why, as a government, we have no interest in reopening old divisions and wounds, and instead are working to remove unnecessary barriers and strengthen our trading relationships. No debate in this House would be complete without the contribution of the honourable member for Strangford. I can assure him, although he's no longer in his place, that in the work of both the Minister for the Cabinet Office and indeed my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, the concerns and needs of Northern Ireland are never far from our thoughts. My honourable friend, the member for Northampton South, brought to bear all of his professional experience working across Europe and made a characteristically powerful case for the mutual recognition of professional qualifications. I was making that case only earlier this morning at a meeting with City UK representatives here in London. Next, we heard from the honourable member for Milkhamshire and Devizes, who spoke eloquently of the need to maintain high standards in farming and the merits of strengthening our trading relationship with the European Union. The honourable member for Norfolk South took us on a veritable tour of research and innovation labs in his constituency. He is right to recognise that innovation today relies not only on often complex, integrated and international supply chains, but also research cooperation. What was the opportunity cost for the years when the previous government took us out of the Horizon Cross-Europe research programme? It is exactly that kind of research collaboration which our own scientists need and demand if they are going to continue to be world-leading in their research domains. The honourable member for Wokingham highlighted some of the statistics that I myself used in this debate to highlight the damage done by our predecessors. He asked if we'd only act in the national interest. That is an undertaking I am happy to offer. National interest is the North Star by which we are navigating these frankly turbulent trading waters today. The honourable member for Bolton West spoke of the civic ties between his community and Germany. It was frankly a timely and helpful reminder that first through the coal and steel community, then through the European Economic Community, and ultimately through the European Union, the European project has always been about peace as well as security and prosperity. The honourable member for Mid Dorset and North Poole also touched on the need for spending on defence to reflect the changing circumstances, not least in the Euro-Atlantic security area. That is a recognition that underpins the Strategic Defence Review and the recent decisions that have been reached in relation to defence expenditure by this government. My honourable friend, the member for Monmouthshire, asked me to pass on her good wishes to the Minister for the Cabinet Office for all of his excellent work ahead of the UK-EU summit next month. As a colleague in the Cabinet Office and indeed as a friend, I will be happy to do so, but she is right to recognise all the work that he is undoing to undo the past damage and rebuild and reset relations with our friends, partners and neighbours in the European Union. The Honourable Member for Richmond Park urged us to take serious action to strengthen our trading relationships with the EU. Again, I can assure her that is exactly the work on which we have committed ourselves. My honourable friend for Kensington and Bayswater returned rightly to the changed context, both on our continent and indeed in our world. Red tape and uncertainty, his description of the inheritance that we secured in July seems to me a pretty fair judgment. But in these history-shaping days, it is right to recognise the changing geopolitical and geoeconomic backdrop for the negotiations underway, not just in the talks in Downing Street today, but being led by the Minister for the Cabinet Office ahead of next month's summit. The Honourable Member for Isher and Walton urged leadership to follow the trade and follow the money. As I referenced earlier, we have chosen to follow the data rather than follow some of the post-imperial delusions that was the hallmark of the previous approach to trade from our predecessors. My honourable friend, the member for Walthamstow, who of course on many occasions has eloquently spoken of the need for closer ties with Europe, talked of the need for new debates and offered a number of powerful suggestions of the way forward at that UK-EU summit. I have to say she offered a fantastically large number of suggestions in what was the necessarily constrained time for her speech, but I have listened carefully to all of them. The honourable member for Dewsbury and Batley urged the government to write a new chapter. I hope that we're actually doing somewhat more than that. We're actually writing a whole new trade strategy that we're aiming to publish in the coming weeks. My honourable friend for Exeter acknowledged the need for partnerships with like-minded nations. I agree with him on the powerful points that he made about the need, particularly in terms of security and defence, for exactly those partnerships, given the changed geopolitical context of which we are all familiar. My honourable friend, the member for Beckenham and Penge, reminded us with reference to the Good Friday Agreement that we must reject isolationism and that we agreed, and indeed I am happy to confirm, that we have left behind an era where a previous Prime Minister resisted the opportunity to confirm President Macron was indeed a friend of the United Kingdom. So let me confirm today, we regard France as a trading partner, a close neighbour, a steadfast security partner, and a country bound to the United Kingdom by bonds not just of shared history, but of shared and continuing friendship. My honourable friend, the member for Chelsea and Fulham, spoke authoritatively of the need for cool-headed, ambitious negotiations, and I can assure him that that is the approach that the government is taking to the coming summit. My honourable friend, the member for Glasgow North, made the case for recognising the challenges of touring artists. Let me place on record my appreciation for all of the work that is done, not just by touring artists, but more broadly by the creative industries and the work they are doing for our country. My honourable friend, the member for Stratford and Bow, in a veritable Noah's Ark of a speech, highlighted the importance not just of the pygmy hippo that she met, but also, more substantively, of the need for an SPS agreement, and I can assure her that we continue to work on all of those issues. My honourable friend, the member for Bury St Edmunds, moved seamlessly on to a discussion of Carl the Crane and indeed his local businesses. I can assure him that we noted all of the points that have been made, and we will endeavour to ensure that small businesses are at the forefront of our thinking as we work not least on SPS and on the other issues of which we've spoken. My honourable friend, the member for Camborne and Redruth, brought a Cornish perspective to the debate, and I listened carefully to all of the points that he made and the need for unnecessary barriers to be brought down. The member for Orkney and Shetland similarly spoke eloquently of the need of the fishermen in his constituency and made the case for an SPS agreement. We've committed in the manifesto to negotiate that veterinary agreement with the EU, an agreement on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, to use the technical term. That's because agri-food producers right across the United Kingdom are among those most affected by being buried in the paperwork left by our predecessors and the checks when exporting to the EU. The EU remains an absolutely vital market for them, accounting for 57% of the UK's agri-food exports in 2024. Between 2018 and 2024, UK exports of agri-food products to the European Union dropped by 16% in inflation-adjusted terms, excluding beverages. I have to say that doesn't sound like the best of all worlds to me. The potential benefits of an SPS agreement are clear. Aston University estimates an SPS agreement could increase UK agri-food exports by fully 22.5%. Bearing that in mind, we import more agri-food from the EU than export to them. A veterinary agreement would, of course, be mutually beneficial. A number of members have raised the issue of the Youth Mobility Scheme. The UK and the EU are in talks ahead of the summit, but we're not going to provide a running commentary, alas, today in this chamber. We made a clear manifesto commitment to bring down net migration and for no return to free movement within the EU. It is important that we determine who comes into our country, and those things are not up for negotiation in the discussions that are continuing. On mutual recognition of professional qualifications, we would also like to strengthen MRPQ arrangements so businesses can access the right talent at the right time. Improvements here would, again, be mutually beneficial. Both the UK and European industries have repeatedly asked for the recognition of professional qualifications between the UK and the EU to be strengthened. This includes 24% of respondents to the recent British Chambers of Commerce annual trade survey and the European Services Forum. On strengthened relations with the EU, this also presents an opportunity to address some of the trade barriers that we did not explicitly reference in our manifesto. For example, regulatory cooperation that's been raised in this debate.
Order. I'm sorry to interrupt the Minister, but we are out of time. Can I thank all members who've participated in this debate? The sitting stands adjourned.